Okay, so in continuance, I have Rodolph. Now, Rodolph has many different spellings. The French is Rodolphe, the English is Rudolph, and he is also called Raoul. Wikipedia actually has some very good information about his name. If you want to go there, here he is though, he's classed as Raoul often, and here's Emma of France is his wife. Let's see what we have. Here he is Ralph, he's called Ralph, but its Germanic roots Rodolphus, fame, glory, and wolf. So there he is, fame, glory, and wolf. And I do have one picture of him that's pretty good. I'll try and find it here. Was it that one? You know what, I may have lost it. I just may have lost it. Oh no. Darn it. Yeah, I guess I lost it, but it was somewhere on the... Gosh darn it. Let me pause this and get at it. Alright, so I did find him. I found him on Reddit, and then he was also on one of the image searches. Yeah, King Rudolph. So in this chapter, he doesn't actually have very much in chapter space, so I don't think he had a very long life. But we'll find out what happened. Yeah, you can already tell these are, well, he is a king, alright, he's just a king, and they are starting to look a little bit more, well, they're starting to look more kingly. Well, this frame looks more kingly, doesn't it? It looks a little bit more 1,000-year time. Here we are at 924. Rodolph was continually employed. No, I'm not speaking in French, sorry. Rodolph was continually employed either in the repression of domestic feuds, or the repulsion of foreign nations and invasions. Having expelled an attempt of the Normans to extend their domains, he repaired to Lorraine, whither he was invited by the nobles, and, having reduced a great part of that kingdom, he compelled the king of Germany to demand a cessation of hostilities. He next turned his arms against William, Duke of Aquitaine, who, unable to oppose his superior strength, averted his resentment by a feigned submission and extorted homage. He had no sooner returned from his expedition to Aquitaine than his attention was called to the rovers of the north, who had renewed their depredations and were laying waste the fertile plains of Burgundy. The Normans of Rouen, too, broke forth into the open hostilities, and having spread themselves over Picardy and Artois, attacked Noyon, from whence they were repulsed with loss. Hugh, Duke of France, whose authority extended from the Loire to the Seine, assembled the militia of Paris, and, entering Normandy, destroyed the whole country with fire and sword. He was soon joined by the king, who detached from his camp in the Beauvaisis, the Count of Vermandois was a part of his army to forge the siege of Eu, which was taken by assault, and all the male inhabitants massacred, without mercy or distinction. Herbert, as a reward for his courage and conduct, obtained the archbishopric of Rem for his son, an infant of 5 years. This was the first instance of the appointment of a child to the possession of ecclesiastical dignities. It established a dangerous precedent and gave rise to numerous abuses. In 926, these advantages were counterbalanced by the loss of Lorraine, which submitted to the King of Germany. Aquitaine also revolted. Champagne was threatened with the incursion of the Hungarians, and the whole empire appeared in a state of convulsion, a prey to the fury of its enemies and the feuds of its citizens. It was at this period a crude and indigested government, where force alone was acknowledged as law. As heterogeneous mixture of monarchy and oligarchy, where everyone proportioned the extent of his power to his ability in acquiring it. Such is the frequent consequence of usurpation and of a deviation from the established rules and lawful authority. The most formidable of these turbulent vassals was the treacherous Count of Vermandois. In 927, Hubert, whose ambition was equal to his perfidy, claimed as the reward of his services the county of Léon, recently become vacant by the death of Rotger. But he received a refusal from the king, who bestowed it on the son of the late count. Herbert, enraged at the failure of his application, resolved on revenge, and he engaged Henry, King of Germany, Hugh, Duke of France, who had lately married Ethelinda, the daughter of Edward, King of England, and the sister of Charles Consort, and William, Duke of Normandy, to enter into his views. So he has some backup now, backup power. They all swore to assist him to the utmost of their power in restoring the throne to its lawful possessor. And the Pope threatened with excommunication whoever should dare to oppose the restoration of Charles. That prince was accordingly released from confinement and conducted to San Quentin, where he was received by the same people who had rejoiced at his deposal with every demonstration of joy. From thence he repaired to Eu, where he received homage from the Duke of Normandy. In 928-929, Rodolph, in order to avert the impending storm, at length offered the city of Léon to Herbert, and that perjured trader, having thus acquired what had alone induced him to take up arms, accepted his proposal. The unfortunate Charles was then sacrificed to the ambition of his nobles and confined to Perony, where he died soon after, on the 50th year of his age and the 30th of his reign. By his first wife, whose name is unknown, he had Giselle, who married Rollo, the first Duke of Normandy. By Frederune, his second wife, he had no child, but by Egiva, sister to Atheltan, King of England, he had Louis de Outremer. This monarch was buried at the Abbey of Saint-Saucy. From 930 to 936, the remaining years of the reign of Rodolph were passed in restraining the incursions of the Normans and in quelling the turbulent spirit of the nobles. The friendship of Herbert, Count of Vermandois, and Hugh, Duke of France, was soon converted into implacable hatred. The war was declared between them, but the former, after being stripped of most of his possessions, at length consented to a truce that was followed by peace. This was the last remarkable event that occurred during the life of Rodolph, who died at Auxerre in 936. The death of this prince was followed by an interregnum of near 6 months. Such was the situation of affairs at this period that no attention was paid to the established rules of succession. Hugh the Black, brother to Rodolph, who had died without children, aspired to the crown, and his pretensions were favoured by the Burgundians. But he had a powerful rival in the person of Hugh, Duke of France, whose dignity of birth and splendour of talents rendered him a formidable competitor. But the nobles, however, were resolved to exclude from the throne any claimant who possessed sufficient vigour and merit to ensure obedience. Hugh, therefore, was rejected. The conjuncture was favourable to the lawful heir, Prince Louis, son of Charles the Simple, who had been taken to England by his mother in order to secure him from the rage of faction. It was from his residence in England that he acquired the appellation of Outre-mer, beyond the sea, or other known as stranger. Hugh, unable to obtain the real dignity himself, was glad to see it conferred on a prince whom he hoped to keep in a state of dependence. With this view he recalled Louis from England, and meeting him at Boulogne, paid him homage as a vassal, and took the oath of fidelity to the youthful monarch. So now we have found a king that's been living, scurried away off to England. And Louis from England. We're going to call him Louis IV. And we don't actually know. I believe Rudolph died in a battle in Soissons, but it's not listed here in the book, which is odd, because normally they list the death. They just say he died at Auxerre in 936. Maybe they'll have something later discussing it. Louis was but 16 when called to the throne of his ancestors. He had been absent from his native country 13 years. The example of Hugh was followed by a great number of nobles and prelates who attended the king to Laon, where he was crowned by Artaud, Archbishop of Rheims, to discharge his obligations to the Duke of France and to secure the fidelity of that powerful nobleman. He appointed him minister and committed to his hands the rein of government. The Duke of Burgundy had presumed on an infant reign to disturb the tranquillity of the kingdom and to seize the city of Langres. The insult was resented by Hugh, who at the head of a powerful army penetrated into Burgundy and compelled the brother of Rodolph to purchase an ignominious peace by the cession of great part of that fertile duchy. But Louis soon became tired with remaining under the tuition of his ambitious subject, who wished to keep him constantly at Paris, where he was sole master. The young king had privately secured the Duke of Normandy and the Counts of Flanders, Vermandois, and Poitiers, who, jealous of the minister's power, cheerfully united in order to release him from the state of captivity in which he was holden. He accordingly withdrew to Leon, where he was met by his mother Zayvra. The Duke, more astonished than alarmed at this circumstance, only sought to increase his power by the influence of fear. He found the means of gaining over the inconstant and perfidious Herbert, who had sufficient influence to make the Normans forsake the interest of the king. They were also joined by Gilbert, Duke of Lorraine, and Otho, King of Germany, promised to protect them. In 937 and 938, as soon as the season would permit, the confederated princes began their march towards those parts where the king's authority was most acknowledged. Louis advanced to meet them, not with a powerful army, but with a band of bishops, whose spiritual weapons were exerted with greater success than the temporal swords and pikes of the troops. These formidable prelates sent to inform the Duke of Normandy and the Count of Vermandois that they excommunicated them both, the first for having burned some towns in Flanders, and the last for unjustly retaining certain possessions belonging to the Abbey of Saint-Remy at Rheims. This extraordinary interference of the ecclesiastical power and the effect it produced are strongly characteristic of the spirit of the times. The rebels, armed at their threats, remained in suspense. The laws of honour, ever sacred, the obligation of an oath, the firmest bond of society, the love of justice, and the regard for their duty, all these potent considerations had proved insufficient to deter them from taking up arms against their sovereign, while the fear of excommunication, the motives for which were probably unjust, checked in a moment the uplifted arm of rebellion. Does it really say checked? Yeah, that's an odd one. Well, checked in a moment, I suppose so. It's odd that they would say that. Prince Hugh, for that was the title he assumed, observing the indecision of his associates, proposed an accommodation, and a truce was accordingly agreed on. In 939, Louis employed this interval of tranquility, I have to remember that one, interval of tranquility, in securing the kingdom of Lorraine, whose inhabitants invited him to reign over them. While he advanced to Verdun, an English fleet appeared on the coast of Flanders in order to protect those maritime towns of Lorraine which had declared for the king. The first offensive and defensive treaty between France and England was concluded during this reign, till when but little intercourse, except such as was merely commercial, had subsisted between the two kingdoms. Having made himself master of the great part of Alsace, Louis compelled several counts, who still remained faithful to the King of Germany, to retire beyond the Rhine, but receiving intelligence that the Bishop of Laon was about to surrender that important city to Herbert, he hastened thither and expelled the seditious prelate. The tide of success then turned. The Dukes of Lorraine and Franconia, to whose care he had entrusted his new conquest, suffered themselves to be taken by surprise. The last was killed by the enemy, and the first was drowned in passing the Rhine, while his widow had taken refuge in the strong fortress in Shrevemont in the county of Liege, whither Louis repaired with a body of troops, and in order to secure her interest in Lorraine, married her in a few days after the death of her husband. But the appearance of Otho speedily reduced all the towns which had declared against him to return to their obedience. In 940, the only effect of this war, in which Louis had signalized his courage and activity, was to make him a new enemy in the person of Otho, who now renewed his ancient engagements with Hugh. That nobleman, in concert with the Count of Vermandois, made incursions upon the territories of the Archbishop of Rheims, to whom the king accorded, by way of recompense for the damage he sustained, the right of coining money. But the prelate did not long enjoy this privilege, for his episcopal city was presently attacked, and after a siege of 6 days reduced. His troops were better in appearance than in reality, and the prelate himself, being taken from a cloister to head a principality, was but little skilled in the art of defending towns. It is here necessary to remark that the bishops, in imitation of the nobles, had assumed the government of their episcopal cities and dioceses. Hence the titles of prince, duke, or count, which many of them still enjoy. Okay, so that's why they're all called that. Hence too that bloody and obstinate war, which lasted 18 years, undertaken and supported by the Count of Vermandois, in order to maintain his son Hugh in the possession of a see, since become the first duchy in the kingdom, a war during which the two rivals were alternately confirmed or deposed, according to the interest and caprice of the court of Rome and the ecclesiastical councils. All told, however, strengthened by the king's interest, the ancient canons and a majority of the councils at length prevailed, though he was obliged to give up the government to the diocese and to content himself with the abbeys of Avenay and Saint Basil, which were assigned him for his support. So he was supposed to content himself with Saint Basil and Avenay. All right, and 941. From Rheims, the rebels marched to Laon, by which the vigour of his defence gave the king time to advance to its relief. On his appearance of the factious leaders retired, and conducting Otho to the palace of Attigny, declared him, by an instance of treachery, hitherto unexampled sovereign of France. Though some of the French monarchs had before been deposed, yet a prince of the blood had always been appointed to fill the vacant throne, to which no stranger had ever been called. Louis, in this calamitous situation, showed himself worthy of the crown he wore by retreats, attacks, and negotiations, sagaciously planned and opportunely enforced. He at length succeeded in his attempts to detach Otho from the factious league, but still fortune displayed her usual inconsistency. His troops were defeated near Laon, and he himself was so closely pressed by the enemy that it was with difficulty he effected his escape. Remember that one also, that here we are with fortune. Here we go. Fortune, but still fortune displayed her usual inconsistency. That's a good one. Okay, so next, this victory was followed by a general defection of the whole kingdom, except the inhabitants of Aquitaine, who alone preserved their fidelity. At last, through the Pope's mediation, peace was concluded. Otho, though proclaimed king by the rebels, had the generosity to declare against them. Hugh and Herbert, forsaken by this powerful ally, returned to their duty and showed submission to that authority which they were unable any longer to contest. In 943, William, Duke of Normandy, surnamed Longsword, had greatly contributed to the restoration of tranquillity, but that wife prince did not live long to enjoy the salutary effects of his interference, being assassinated at an interview with Arnoul, Count of Flanders, on the river Somme. He left an infant son named Richard, whom Louis took under his protection and conducted to Laon, where he kept him in close confinement. According to some authors, he intended to, I don't know, I'm sorry, this one's got me. He intended to hamstring the young prince, in order that, being maimed and lame, he might be deemed incapable of being placed on the throne and at the head of armies, really was hamstringing, like it was something to do to someone, to do something evil to someone, hurt their hamstring. Okay. But two historians who wrote at a period nearer to the present affirm that he only threatened the prince with that punishment in case he should leave the city without his permission. Richard, however, was preserved from the danger by the vigilance of his governor, Ulfman, who, in the disguise of a groom, escaped with his pupil, concealed in a truss of hay, and mounting him on a fleet of horses, conveyed him in safety to the friendly castle of Bernard, Count of Senlis. Prince Hugh promised, they were probably nice cows also. Anyway, Prince Hugh promised this nobleman to afford him effectual protection against the resentment of Louis. But he was induced to break his word on a proposal made him by the king to divide Normandy between them, on condition that the expense of reducing it should be mutually borne. A treaty for this purpose was concluded in a few days, and Louis, entering Normandy, advanced to Rouen with a powerful army, while the Duke of France penetrated into the country of Bayeux. In 944 and 945, the Normans, unable to resist their united forces, endeavoured to sow division between the allies. With this view, they offered to acknowledge the sovereignty of Louis, provided he would compel Hugh to leave their territory. The proposal was accepted by the king, and the duke retired, enraged at his perfidy, and vowing revenge. An opportunity for putting his threats in execution speedily occurred. Louis, having advanced to attack Aigoual, king of Denmark, who had landed with an army of Danes, in order to support the claims of the infant duke. His troops were defeated with great slaughter, and he himself was taken prisoner. Hugh, at the solicitation of Queen Gerbage, immediately convened the Parliament and expatiated largely in favour of the royal authority. By his advice, it was resolved that the king should be released on giving his second son for a hostage, and that the young Richard should be established in his duchy. The Normans, on this condition, surrendered Louis into the hands of Hugh, who refused to set him at liberty till he had ceded the city of Leon. So now we have Aigoual, king of Denmark. Louis is now having advanced to attack the king of Denmark, who's landed there. And onward we're going to 946 AD. During these transactions, Hubert, Count of Vermandois, had died, and his last moments were embittered by the pangs of remorse. He left several sons, and among others Albert, who was the head of the house of Vermandois. Louis, being determined to revenge the perfidy of the father upon the children, a bloody war ensued. in which that monarch was frequently worsted. But a contest still more obstinate and dangerous was he compelled to maintain against Hugh, whose power set his utmost efforts at defiance. Assisted by the King of Germany and the Count of Flanders, Louis marched against the rebels at the head of an army of 180,000 men. But Hugh prudently declined a combat with a force so superior to his own, and the king reaped no other advantage from his accession of strength than the capture of Rheims, the expulsion of Archbishop Hugh, the re-establishment of Artois, and the devastation of the Duchy of France. Having formed the siege of Rouen, he was foiled in his attempts to reduce it, and after losing a great number of men, was compelled to withdraw his troops. So there was a very big battle there. 948. Still, however, hostilities continued with unabated ardour, though without any other success than the desolation of fertile provinces. But Hugh at length prevailed so far that the crown was within his grasp. He was strenuously urged to seize it by his numerous partisans. Louis, in this dilemma, was reduced to the dangerous and degrading necessity of having recourse to the authority of the Church. He repaired to the Council of Ingelheim, which had been convened by the Pope, where he was met by Otho, his ally. And when the two monarchs had taken their seats on the same bench, the Pope's legate read aloud the instructions he had received from the master. Okay, so the legate is reading the instructions now. Received from the master, who delegated to him the power of crowning and of deposing sovereigns. The French monarch then rose and demanded justice for the daring attempts of an arbitrary subject who had usurped his authority, and left him but the empty title of king. The fathers, moved by his situation, threatened to excommunicate his rebellious vassal unless he instantly appeared before the council and justified his conduct. The Duke, refusing to comply with the citation, the sentence of excommunication was issued against him. That same year, by the Council of Trèves, and afterwards confirmed at Rome, Hugh, alarmed for the consequences of this proceeding, which, though he despised it himself, he knew that it had great influence on the minds of the people, consented to an accommodation with Louis, to whom he restored the castle of Léon, and whom he acknowledged for his sovereign. But still he cherished a secret enmity, which lasted till the death of that prince, who perished by a singular accident. In 954, one of his sons, named Louis, having died at Léon, he determined in future to reside at Rheims. As he approached that city, he saw a wolf, which he immediately followed on full gallop, when his horse stumbled and threw him. In the injury, it proved fatal, being carried to the archbishop's palace, he there expired, in the 33rd year of his age, and the 18th of his reign. He was interred at the church of Saint-Remy. Louis was possessed of many good qualities. I'll say Louis IV here. His courage, yes, was undaunted, and his political talents were far from contemptible. The misfortunes of his reign proceeded chiefly from a facility of disposition, which laid him open to deceit, a defect not uncommon in virtuous minds, though seldom to be found in those of a contrary description. Louis had by his queen Gerbage, the widow of Gilbert, Duke of Lorraine, 5 sons: Lothaire, Louis, Carloman, Charles, and Henry, and 2 daughters, Matilda, married some time after his death, to Conrad, King of Burgundy, and Albertrade, wife to Renaud, Count of Russie. Only 2 of the princes survived him: Lothaire, who succeeded to the crown, and Charles, who was unjustly excluded from the throne of his ancestors. The first was only in his 13th or 14th year, and the second but a year old. The eldest, whom his father had taken the precaution to associate with him in the empire, had the sole government of the kingdom, to the total exclusion of the youngest, contrary to the custom that had prevailed from the very foundation of the monarchy. Perhaps this was owing to the infancy of Charles, or more probably it was a stroke of policy in Hugh, who imagined that a division of the kingdom would effect a diminution of his authority. Whatever was the cause, this example was which experience has proved to be so highly beneficial, has since become a custom, sanctioned by the positive laws of the realm. So they keep expanding the kingdom and then shrinking it depending on how old the other one is becoming. I believe that's what they're really going on about. Alright, so I'll end it there before I go into Lothaire. Oh no, wait, maybe Lothaire's not that much. I was only at 45 in. Oh, Lothaire's not so much. Okay, and you notice now they're naming, in the namings, same name in the sons, same name in the sons. So everything is getting rather like copied, mimicked. 956. Hugh, possessed of power almost absolute, might easily have placed the diadem of his own brows, but afraid to assume a title which could not fail to ensure him the envy and resentment of the nobles, he chose to confer the regal dignity on the lawful heir, and Lothaire was accordingly crowned at Rheims. Still, that imperious nobleman preserved his extensive authority, and in addition to the dignities he already possessed, he now acquired to the Duchy of Aquitaine, which was taken from the family of the Counts of Poitiers. Yes, Poitiers, I believe so, in order to gratify his ambition. Such was the degree of grandeur in which Hugh had attained when he expired at Dordain, little regretted by the king, on whose prerogatives he infringed, though greatly lamented by his numerous friends. It is said of him that he reigned 20 years without being king. He had acquired the appellation of the White from his complexion, and of the Tall from his stature, of the Prince from the extent of his power, and of the Abbot from the 3 abbeys of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, Saint-Denis, and Sainte-Martine at Tours, which he possessed. These he transmitted to his son Hugh Capet. Besides Hugh Capet, this nobleman left 2 other sons, Otho and Eudes or Henry, who were successively dukes of Burgundy, and 2 daughters, Emma, who married to Richard, Duke of Normandy, and Beatrice, wife to Frederick I, Duke of the Upper Lorraine. The reign of Lothaire is marked by no event of importance, his authority being almost confined to the city of Leon. He was long a quiet spectator of the wars between his powerful vassals. He made an unsuccessful attempt on Aquitaine, and after seeking in vain to gain possession of the person of Richard, Duke of Normandy, he was at length compelled to secure that duchy to him and his heirs. In Flanders, his efforts were more fortunate. He reduced Arras, Douai, and several other strong places, and obliged Count Baldwin III to sue for peace and mercy. On his return from this expedition, he concluded at Cologne a treaty of marriage with the Princess Emma and daughter of Lothaire, King of Italy, and of his wife Adelaide, who was afterwards married to Emperor Otho. So although he was king at the very young age, he wasn't really given rights to do much, apparently. I'll have to go into why that's going on. Well, I guess it's because he was so young. There were others in charge, and in this case, I believe Hugh possessed the power almost absolute. So here we are. The nuptials were celebrated some months after. This is the married to Emperor Otho. The nuptials were celebrated some months after, and were succeeded by a perfect calm in the empire, which lasted several years, and which alone sufficed to prove the great capacity of a monarch, who possessed only of a few towns and very small army, could still repress the ambitious attempts of his nobles, and keep within due bounds those haughty vassals who had so long preserved a state of independence. In 965, but the disputes with regard to Lorraine at length rekindled the destructive torch of war, and proved fatal to the descendants of Charlemagne. The king had ceded his rights to that kingdom to his brother, Prince Charles, who had hitherto in vain endeavoured to assert them. When Otho II, in order to divide the royal family, offered the duchy of Lower Lorraine to that prince, which comprehended the Brabant and all the provinces between the Rhine and the Schelde, as far as the sea, but on condition that he should hold it as fief under the crown of Germany. Charles, whose revenue was small, joyfully accepted the offer, and taking the required oath of fidelity, established his residence at Brussels. The French were highly enraged at this proceeding, and saw with indignation the brother of their sovereign become the vassal of a foreign prince. Such was the motive which operated to the exclusion of Charles from the crown, and made it pass into another family, in which it has remained ever since. All right, up through to 980. When the king was apprised of his brother's conduct, he marched into Upper Lorraine, and seizing Metz, received homage from the majority of the nobles. He then advanced to Aix-la-Chapelle, where he had nearly surprised the emperor as he was sitting at table. The town was pillaged by the troops. Otho, in his turn, overran France with a powerful army, and laid siege to Paris, where he was determined, he said, to sing Hallelujah. Hugh Capet, whom he informed of his intention, prevented him from gratifying his wish, and by a vigorous resistance the Sallies' judiciously planned and successfully executed, at length compelled him to raise the siege. On his retreat he was attacked by Lothaire, and lost so many of his troops in different skirmishes that not 1/6 of his army returned to Germany. But the vigorous exertions of Lothaire were productive of no solid advantage. He reduced all the towns of Lorraine, but was unable to keep them, not having sufficient troops to supply them with garrisons. Besides, circumstances were unfavourable to longer expeditions, as the vassals were only obliged to keep the field for a certain time. Before he dismissed his nobles, he repaired to Compiègne, where he associated his son Louis, a boy of 12 years old, with him in the empire. A peace at length concluded between Lothaire and Otho, to whom he ceded the kingdom of Lorraine. He gave to. All right. On condition, here's the condition, that he should hold it as a fief of the crown of France. Notwithstanding this treaty, he soon after made an irruption into that devoted country, where he committed great devastations and took the town of Verdun. This was where he committed this was the last memorable exploit of his reign. Okay. Last of his reign. He died the following year at Rheims, in the 45th year of his age, and the 32nd of his reign. He was buried in the church of Saint-Remy, where his tomb may still be seen. Some authors have affirmed that he was poisoned by his wife Emma, and this suspicion appears to receive confirmation from her fears left the reports concerning her licentious conduct should be investigated, from her ambition to reign under the name of her son, and from her connections with the imperialists and the inhabitants of Lorraine. But the mystery in which this dark transaction is involved renders it impossible to speak with decision on the subject. Lothaire was distinguished for his courage, activity, and vigilance, his projects well concerted, and his actions were generally marked by wisdom, spirit, and perseverance. In times of anarchy and revolt, his prudence sufficed to gain him ascendancy over the minds of men, which he endeavoured to turn to the advantage of the state. And had his life been prolonged, it is probable that his bold attempts to reunite the scattered portions of the French monarchy would have been crowned with success. His principal defect was an occasional versatility of mind that sometimes led him to a violation of his promises. Besides Louis, who succeeded him, he had two natural sons, Arnoul, Archbishop of Rheims, and Otho, who died in his infancy. Right, so that was the two of them. I believe that was Louis IV, and then off to Lothaire.